For centuries, the Great Pyramids have stood as the ultimate symbol of Egypt, the cradle of civilization, the first chapter of human history. But what if that story is wrong? In 2025, advanced radar scans beneath the Giza plateau revealed impossible shapes, spiraling tunnels carved with mathematical precision, shafts plunging over 600 meters into the bedrock, and vast chambers sealed for millennia. If true, then the pyramids we see today may be nothing more than markers, pointing to a hidden world, a lost civilization buried beneath the sand. Tonight, we descend into those secrets, into the silence beneath the stones, where myth and geology meet, and where echoes of a lost world may still wait to be found. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery we uncover, and share in the comments. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Your voices keep these forgotten worlds alive. The desert stretches endlessly under the Egyptian sky, a vast ocean of gold where wind replaces waves and dunes drift like tides. Above it all, the sun rains mercilessly, burning down on stone and sand that have witnessed millennia. Here, on the Giza plateau, 3 pyramids rise like frozen thunder, their edges softened by centuries yet still commanding, still impossible. Tourists crowd the causeways, snapping photographs and marveling at these monuments we are told mark the very beginning of civilization. Yet beneath that familiar scene, in March 2025, a very different story began to unfold. On that morning, a small group of researchers gathered not with chisels or brushes, but with machines that looked more at home in planetary science than archaeology. They set up antenna arrays, computer consoles, and generators, not to look at the pyramids above, but at the stone beneath. The team was led by Professor Corrado Malanga of the University of Pisa and Filippo Biondi of the University of Strathclyde, accompanied by researcher Armando May. They were not treasure hunters or mystics, but scientists wielding synthetic aperture radar, SAR, a technology first developed for probing planetary surfaces on Mars and the Moon. Its purpose, to send electromagnetic pulses deep into the Earth and then reconstruct 3-dimensional maps from the echoes that returned. The promise of SAR is astonishing. Unlike conventional excavation, it allows archaeologists to peel back the ground without lifting a single stone. The team expected modest results. Archaeology rarely produces revolutions. More often it is a matter of refinements. A new chamber here, a clarification there, a better understanding of how stones were cut or aligned. But what appeared on their monitors that day was anything but ordinary. First came the spirals. 4 colossal formations curling into the bedrock, each coil regular, each curve maintaining flawless proportions as they descended. These were not faint disturbances in the data or ambiguous shadows. They were bold, geometric, and undeniable. Nature does not carve spirals into limestone with such mathematical precision. Then came the shafts. 8 immense cylinders plunging into the earth, each more than 2,200 feet deep. A mile of stone drilled downward, deeper than the Empire State Building is tall. Their walls appeared smooth, their diameters consistent from top to bottom. The scans suggested a level of engineering far beyond anything attributed to ancient Egypt. Even with modern equipment, drilling to such depths into solid rock is a formidable challenge. And yet, here they were, revealed beneath one of the most studied sites on Earth. It was only when the team combined the spiral and shaft data that the true picture emerged. The spirals were not isolated curiosities. They wrapped around the shafts like staircases, winding pathways that seemed designed for human descent. Imagine torches flickering along their walls, lines of figures carrying offerings or tools, disappearing into corridors where the sun could never reach. The effect was breathtaking, less an anomaly than an entire subterranean world. The implications spread like shockwaves. If such structures truly exist beneath the Giza plateau, then what lies above, the pyramids themselves, may be only the visible crown of a far larger hidden complex. The pyramids would no longer be solitary monuments, but markers of an underground city, a second world carved into stone and sealed away. Skepticism, of course, followed quickly. Egyptologists reminded the world that radar data is notoriously difficult to interpret. Dr. Zahi Hawass dismissed the claims outright as fake news, insisting no permits had ever been granted for such investigations. Geophysicists argued that at extreme depths, radar images often generate distortions, turning noise into patterns that look architectural but are not. They pointed out that the vivid computer renderings circulated in the media were interpretations, not photographs. And yet the objections themselves revealed something curious. If these were only distortions, why did they resolve into consistent repeating geometries? Why did the spirals curve with the elegance of deliberate design, and the chambers measure as perfect cubes, their walls aligned at right angles? Natural processes produce randomness, not blueprint-like regularity. History has seen such moments before. When Heinrich Schliemann uncovered the ruins of Troy in the 1870s, scholars scoffed, insisting Homer's epic was myth, not memory. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, experts doubted an intact burial could exist. Revolutionary discoveries are often resisted first, accepted later. Could Giza be facing the same cycle? To understand the gravity of this, consider the precision implied. One chamber, mapped at nearly 80 meters on each side, would rival an Olympic swimming pool in scale or a city block in volume. Several such chambers appeared in the scans, connected by linear passages. Even if half were illusions, the remainder would still demand explanation. No natural cave systems are known beneath Giza's limestone plateau. No geological processes account for perfect cubes aligned like architecture. And then there was water. Subtle features in the radar data resembled channels, lines not as solid as walls, not as open as voids, but suggestive of conduits shaped to guide flow. Cross-referenced with electrical resistivity tomography, the evidence strengthened. These channels connected chambers, following slopes consistent with hydraulic design. In ancient Egypt, water was life, power, and ritual. To find such complexity underground hints at a civilization not merely building monuments, but managing entire subterranean environments. Pause here, under the glare of the desert sun, and imagine the scene differently. The pyramids are not isolated tombs, but the peaks of a vast iceberg, their visible forms pointing to something greater below. Imagine standing at the base of Khafre's pyramid, knowing that beneath your feet spiral staircases descend into chambers untouched for millennia. Imagine what might rest in those sealed spaces. Artifacts, texts, or perhaps only silence. A silence as eloquent as the blank walls of the Great Pyramid itself. The desert has always been a master of concealment. It buries as much as it reveals. Sand drifts over ruins, winds grind inscriptions into dust, centuries compress memory into myth. And yet technology now allows us to listen beneath the surface, to hear echoes hidden in stone. The radar of 2025 whispered of staircases, shafts and chambers, a geometry too precise to ignore. Skeptics remain, and until excavation confirms the data, debate will rage. But whether proven tomorrow or in decades, the discovery leaves us with a haunting thought. What if the pyramids are not the beginning of civilization, but the echo of one already lost? The desert sun still beats down, the tourists still wander, the stones still gleam as they have for 4,500 years. Yet somewhere beneath, in darkness untouched since the age of floods and forgotten kings, spiral staircases may still wait for footsteps, and chambers may still hold secrets not meant for this age. Step inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the air changes. The heat of the desert fades into cool stone, and every sound seems to fall away. Footsteps echo against limestone walls, their rhythm swallowed quickly by emptiness. Visitors expect the monument to proclaim its greatness in the way all Egyptian architecture does, with carved hieroglyphs, painted scenes, and royal declarations etched in stone. But here, there is nothing. The interior of the Great Pyramid is unlike any other royal monument in Egypt. The King's Chamber, built of massive granite blocks transported hundreds of miles from Aswan, contains no inscriptions, no cartouche, no prayer, no blessing. The Queen's Chamber, smaller but equally enigmatic, offers only blank walls. The Grand Gallery, a soaring passageway of corbelled stone stretching upward like a stone canyon, is silent too, its perfection unaccompanied by explanation. This is startling when placed against the rest of Egyptian tradition. The Pyramid of Unas, built a century later, is inscribed floor to ceiling with the pyramid texts. Over 700 spells meant to guide the pharaoh into the afterlife. Temples from Karnak to Luxor overflow with carved reliefs, boasting of conquests and divine favour. Even smaller tombs of nobles are filled with wall paintings of banquets, offerings, and scenes of daily life. The Egyptians wrote endlessly, believing words anchored the soul and preserved memory against time. Why then would they leave their greatest monument mute? The silence grows more puzzling when we consider Egypt's obsession with documentation. Scribes recorded everything: deliveries of bread, the rationing of beer to workers, inventories of cattle and copper chisels. Royal projects especially were meticulously chronicled. At temples, pharaohs carved inscriptions describing the ceremonies of foundation, the dedication to gods, the size of the workforce, and the divine dreams that inspired their building. At Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut recorded her expedition to Punt in great detail. At Abu Simbel, Ramses II depicted the Battle of Kadesh blow by blow. The act of building was never private. It was public proclamation, carved for eternity. And yet, for the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the most ambitious construction project of them all, we have no such records. No papyrus scroll describing its planning, no stele commemorating its completion, no inscription carved into its interior declaring Khufu's triumph. The absence is thunderous. Mainstream Egyptology leans on a fragile thread to connect Khufu to the Great Pyramid: the graffiti marks discovered in 1837 by Colonel Howard Weiss. Blasting his way into the relieving chambers above the king's chamber with gunpowder, Weiss uncovered rough red ochre inscriptions, quarry marks, and names of work gangs, some including a cartouche of Khufu. To Egyptologists, these crude symbols prove the pyramid was built during Khufu's reign. Yet controversy surrounds them. The handwriting of the glyphs is irregular, not matching the formality of royal inscriptions. Some hieroglyphs appear inconsistent with Old Kingdom style. Critics have even suggested Weiss, desperate to prove his theories, may have forged them to secure his place in history. While this accusation remains debated, even if the marks are genuine, they represent little more than workmen's notes, hardly the grand proclamation expected of a pharaoh who supposedly built the most enduring monument on earth. Contrast this with other 4th dynasty pyramids. The Pyramid of Sneferu at Dashur reveals clear construction phases, with collapsed sections and architectural experiments visible in its design. Sneferu left behind inscriptions attesting to his building campaigns. Later pyramids, though smaller and less perfect, follow predictable traditions: mortuary temples, causeways, reliefs, and inscriptions. The Great Pyramid, however, stands apart, too perfect, too silent, too singular. It is as if it dropped into history without precedent or successor. Some scholars argue the silence is symbolic, a deliberate choice to reflect Khufu's desire for an eternal, wordless monument. Yet this explanation feels strained when set against Egypt's overwhelming habit of inscribing everything. Why would one pharaoh abandon the very medium that guaranteed immortality? Why would he choose obscurity over memory? Others suggest a more radical interpretation, that Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid at all. Instead, he found it. He inherited it from a culture already vanished, one whose identity and methods were lost. Perhaps he added to it, repurposed it, or claimed it as his own, but its original builders belonged to an earlier world. If so, then the silence of the chambers is not an omission, but a clue. The blank walls are mute because their creators were not Egyptians. Their names, language, and culture have disappeared, leaving only stone as testimony. This would explain why the Great Pyramid is unmatched. Later dynasties tried to imitate it, but could never replicate its scale, its precision, or its astronomical alignments. It stands apart not as the pinnacle of Egyptian architecture, but as an inheritance from another civilization, one Egypt could not match, only preserve. The pyramid's orientation strengthens this suspicion. It aligns almost perfectly to the cardinal points, deviating by less than a fraction of a degree. Its base measurements differ by only a few inches over 756 feet. Its proportions encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, whether by design or coincidence. Such precision seems improbable for the tools and techniques attributed to the Old Kingdom. If Khufu's masons truly achieved it, why was it never achieved again? Inside, the silence itself becomes symbolic. Standing in the king's chamber, surrounded by granite walls rising 20 feet high, the emptiness is almost overwhelming. Without inscriptions, the mind fills the void with its own echoes. Questions, imaginings, doubts. The stone speaks only through its mass, its geometry, its endurance. It is a monument not of narrative but of permanence. Perhaps this was the point, or perhaps it is evidence of something deeper, something forgotten. When monuments speak loudly, we know their message. When they whisper nothing, we wonder what was erased. The silence of the Great Pyramid is not passive. It is active, compelling us to listen harder, to notice what is missing. No texts, no images, no names, only a structure so precise it seems less built than conjured, less designed than remembered. The Great Pyramid does not answer questions, it generates them. Why would the Egyptians, chroniclers of every triumph, leave this wonder without words? Why would the greatest monument of the ancient world be devoid of the very inscriptions that defined its culture? Unless, and here the silence grows deafening, it was not truly theirs to explain. Standing inside, one feels the weight not only of stone, but of absence. The architecture itself becomes a riddle, massive, precise, and mute. A silence carved in limestone, holding its secrets long after voices and names have vanished. West of the Great Pyramid, away from the tourist pathways that funnel crowds toward the Sphinx, lies a quieter place. The Western Cemetery stretches across the plateau in neat rows of mastabas, rectangular tombs built of limestone blocks, their forms low and solid, like massive stone benches laid out with military precision. For more than a century, this field of the dead has been studied, mapped, and catalogued with care. Every mastaba has been numbered, every passage has been drawn. Inscriptions have been translated, and grave goods classified. Egyptologists often point to this area as complete, a site where nothing remains to surprise us. The mastabas themselves tell a story of order. These were the resting places of administrators, priests and courtiers, men and women of influence who lived in the shadow of Khufu and his successors. Their tombs mirror their status, not as grand as the pyramids, but still enduring, their walls carved with hieroglyphs praising the pharaoh and scenes of offerings that promised eternal sustenance in the afterlife. The cemetery has always been understood as a complement to the pyramids, part of a single funerary landscape. To the trained eye, it appeared that all mysteries here had been solved long ago. But in 2023, a team from Higashi Nippon International University and Tohoku University arrived with a different approach. Instead of focusing on what could be seen, the mastabas, the carved reliefs, the visible architecture, they turned their instruments toward the spaces in between. They carried ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography, technologies designed to see what lies beneath the surface. Their question was simple: was the empty ground truly empty? The results were startling. Just 2 meters below the sand, the radar revealed a precise L-shaped formation etched into the bedrock. Its angles were sharp, its lines unmistakably geometric. Nature does not create perfect right angles. Geological fractures do not arrange themselves into letters. And yet, under the sand, an L shape appeared. Even more astonishing, at a depth of 5 to 10 meters, the scans revealed another anomaly. A perfect square cavity, about 10 meters on each side. It showed the radar signature not of solid stone, but of air. An empty chamber where none should exist. Together, the shallow L shape and the deeper square suggested a design, as if one were an entrance leading to the other. This was not supposed to happen here. The Western Cemetery is thought to be one of the most predictable parts of Giza. Mastabas follow standard patterns: heavy limestone foundations, rectangular chambers, and shafts leading to burial rooms. None of them involve L-shaped surface features or square voids hidden in the rock. The discovery was like hearing a discordant note in a familiar song, something entirely out of place. The Japanese researchers published their findings cautiously in archaeological research in Asia. They noted that the geometry was too precise to be natural, that the anomalies appeared deliberately buried rather than accidental. The surface L shape seemed constructed to blend into the landscape, covered by sand so thoroughly that only radar could reveal it. They proposed it might represent a deliberately concealed entrance. Reactions were mixed. Some Egyptologists urged caution, reminding the world that ground-penetrating radar has often produced false positives at Giza. In previous decades, radar had suggested voids that turned out to be nothing more than softer soil or natural fissures. Others warned that the anomalies might be remnants of earlier excavation trenches, long since forgotten and covered. Without excavation, they argued, nothing could be proven. But the geometry refuses to be dismissed so easily. An L shape above a square is not random. It looks like a doorway above a chamber. And here folklore lends a haunting echo. For centuries, local Egyptians have spoken of hidden passages beneath the plateau, of sealed gates that connect different parts of the necropolis. Some tales even describe cursed doorways that lead to forbidden spaces under the desert. Scholars have usually dismissed these as legends, born of imagination around mysterious ruins. Yet now, with radar showing precisely such a hidden form, the old stories gain new weight. Picture the scene today. A hot wind sweeps across the plateau, lifting dust over the weathered mastabas. On the surface, everything looks ordinary, unchanged since explorers first mapped it a century ago. Yet beneath that thin crust of sand lies something else. An L-shaped formation carefully concealed, connected to a square void. It is as if someone long ago wanted it to remain hidden, crafting the surface to appear natural, burying it deep enough that only advanced instruments millennia later could find its outline. If true, the implications are profound. Why would builders create a chamber system in the middle of the cemetery and then go to such lengths to hide it? Was it an entrance to a larger network of underground tunnels beneath the plateau? A ritual chamber meant to be invisible to the living? Or could it be a gateway into a deeper complex, one deliberately erased from the visible landscape, its secret protected even as dynasties rose and fell above? Egypt's funerary architecture is usually meant to be seen. Temples display their reliefs. Tombs are decorated for eternity. Even when entrances are hidden, they are hidden from robbers, not from history. But this anomaly in the Western Cemetery seems different. It suggests a strategy of concealment on another level. Not simply protection, but deliberate invisibility, as though its creators intended to vanish from memory. Skeptics remind us, until excavations confirm it, the L shape and the square remain anomalies, not chambers. But anomalies have a way of multiplying at Giza. First, radar finds voids in the Great Pyramid. Then geological surveys suggest the Sphinx endured reigns older than history. Now the cemetery, thought to be understood in every detail, whispers of secret entrances. If one concealed gateway exists, how many more lie waiting? What if the plateau itself is less a cemetery than a mask? A carefully arranged facade of tombs and monuments concealing a far greater story beneath. For now, the L-shaped structure lies undisturbed. The sand covers it. The mastabas stand quiet above it. Yet technology has already betrayed its presence, drawing sharp lines on radar screens where emptiness should have been. And in those lines, a possibility takes shape. That beneath the most studied ground in Egypt, there are still doors waiting to be opened. At sunrise, when the desert sky glows in pale orange and violet, the Great Sphinx emerges from shadow. Its body stretches 240 feet across the Giza plateau. Its face, eroded but still regal, gazes eastward, eternally awaiting the rising sun. To the eyes of most, it is simply what guidebooks promise. A monument carved by Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE, weathered by sand and time. But to geologists who look closely, the Sphinx tells a different story, one not written by wind, but by water. Walk along the walls of the Sphinx's enclosure, and you see deep vertical grooves cut into the limestone. The edges are rounded, smoothed as though shaped not by centuries of sand abrasion, but by streams of water pouring down the walls again and again. The body of the Sphinx itself is carved with channels, softened curves, and flowing lines that echo the marks left on cliffs in rainy climates. The head, however, shows different weathering, less water erosion, more recent damage, suggesting it was recarved at some later time. This contrast is what first caught the attention of Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, in the early 1990s. Schoch argued that the weathering patterns could not have formed under the desert climate of the last 4,500 years. Egypt in the dynastic era is a land of aridity, where rainfall measures only millimeters per year. Such limited moisture cannot carve deep flowing channels. To create the patterns visible today, the Sphinx must have endured centuries of heavy rainfall, the kind of rainfall that drenched the Sahara thousands of years earlier during what scientists call the Green Sahara period. That period, stretching roughly from 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, saw North Africa transformed. Instead of desert, the land bloomed with lakes, savannas, and rivers. Rock art from the region shows giraffes, elephants, and hippos thriving, where today there is only sand. Archaeologists have uncovered remains of fishing villages, stone tools, and evidence of cattle herding from this wetter age. If the Sphinx was carved then, it would place its origin at least 2,000 years before the first recognized pharaohs, perhaps even earlier. The implications are staggering. It would mean the Sphinx predates Egyptian civilization as we know it. Instead of being Khafre's creation, it may have been inherited by him, adapted into his pyramid complex, perhaps even given a new face carved into its head. In this view, Khafre was not its builder, but its restorer. Mainstream Egyptology, however, resists this conclusion. Critics argue that the erosion could be explained by other processes: salt crystallization inside the stone, subsurface water rising and evaporating, or rare floods from the Nile. They caution that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and no definitive artifacts have been found to prove a pre-dynastic origin. For them, the Sphinx remains firmly in the 4th dynasty, tied to Khafre's reign, and yet the geological evidence continues to nag. The vertical channels in the enclosure walls look almost identical to those seen on cliffs exposed to long-term rain in wetter climates. Geologists note that such patterns are not produced by wind erosion, which carves horizontally, or by flash floods, which cut jagged, chaotic lines. Instead, they resemble the slow, patient carving of rainfall across centuries. The head's smaller degree of erosion deepens the mystery. If the body was exposed for centuries during heavy rains, while the head was either sheltered or recarved later, it suggests the monument has lived multiple lives. Its original form may have been something else entirely, a lion, perhaps, later reshaped into the pharaoh's likeness to fit dynastic ideology. Other clues support the idea of greater antiquity. The inventory stela, though controversial, describes Khufu repairing the Sphinx rather than building it. Ancient Greek historians like Herodotus and Pliny the Elder never mention the Sphinx at all, as though its origins were already too ancient to remember. Local Arab traditions from the medieval period spoke of the Sphinx as a monument from before the flood. If the Sphinx is older than we think, it may be one of the last surviving witnesses to an age washed away. During the Younger Dryas and the transition into the Holocene, massive floods and climate swings transformed the Earth. Could the Sphinx be a survivor of that world? Its scars the fingerprints of rains that no longer fall on Egypt? Stand before it at dawn, and you feel this possibility. The monument seems both alien and familiar, both timeless and misplaced. Its face is human, but its body carries the weight of ages that may not belong to history as we know it. The winds of the desert can smooth, the sand can scour, but only rain can carve the marks we see today. Rain that has not touched this plateau in over 5 millennia. If the Sphinx remembers rain, then it remembers a world Egypt itself has forgotten. It remembers green plains where now there is only sand. It remembers rivers and storms that once nourished life before vanishing into desert silence. And in its memory, carved into stone, lies the possibility of a civilization older than Khafre, older than Egypt, perhaps older than all recorded history. The silence of the Sphinx is not empty. It is the silence of survival, a monument speaking in the language of geology, whispering across time of a world drowned by climate and buried by sand. If the Sphinx holds within its body the memory of rain, what other memories does it guard in silence, waiting for us to finally listen? Travel south along the Nile, following the river's winding path as it cuts through cliffs and green floodplains, and eventually you reach Abydos. This ancient city, sacred for millennia, was believed to be the burial place of Osiris, lord of the underworld. Pharaohs of every dynasty made pilgrimages here, seeking to connect themselves with the god of resurrection. It is at Abydos that one finds one of the most beautiful temples of the New Kingdom, the Temple of Seti I, with its exquisite reliefs, painted ceilings, and graceful proportions. Its artistry represents the pinnacle of dynastic Egypt, a confident civilization declaring its devotion in vivid color. But hidden just behind this temple lies something that does not fit. Descend into a narrow passage and you come upon the Osirian, a structure so starkly different in style and execution that it seems to belong to another world. Where Seti's temple dazzles with imagery and detail, the Osirian confronts with silence and mass. Enormous red granite blocks, some weighing over 50 tons, are fitted together without mortar. They rise in pillars and walls that form a sunken chamber, surrounded by a water trench, as though the builders wished to anchor the monument to both earth and water simultaneously. Unlike most Egyptian temples, which were carefully roofed and enclosed, the Osirian appears to have been built open to the sky, even though it is recessed far below ground level. The effect on visitors is disorienting. Many archaeologists who first encountered it in the early 1900s remarked that it felt megalithic, not Egyptian. The stones resemble those at Stonehenge or even the Andean sites of South America. Massive, geometric, unadorned. It lacks the inscriptions that usually saturate Egyptian sacred architecture. The granite is bare, with only a few later hieroglyphs crudely added. To walk there is to step into a chamber where scale and weight replace imagery and text. It feels less like a temple and more like a machine, built for permanence rather than ceremony. Mainstream Egyptology has explained these differences by suggesting that Seti I deliberately commissioned the Osirian in an archaic style, intending to create a symbolic tomb for Osiris. The stark megalithic look was, in this view, a conscious evocation of primordial times. The water channel represented the primeval waters of creation, the uninscribed blocks a gesture toward mythic antiquity, and indeed the Osirian's axis aligns precisely with Seti's temple above, suggesting the two were planned together. This has convinced many scholars that both structures were contemporary, part of a single sacred program. Yet the anomalies resist easy assimilation. Why would Seti, whose artisans produced some of the most refined reliefs in Egyptian history, suddenly choose to commission a structure that looked prehistoric? Why would his workers employ construction techniques, moving and fitting 50-ton blocks that were unnecessary in his age, when smaller blocks and elaborate decoration sufficed? And why does the Osirian bear signs of water erosion far deeper than anything expected for a structure supposedly built in the 13th century BCE? That erosion is difficult to explain. The trenches and walls of the Osirian show patterns of wear consistent with long-term exposure to flowing water, not just occasional flooding, but Abydos has been dry for thousands of years. For the Osirian to have sustained such erosion, it would need to have stood during an era when Egypt's climate was wetter, perhaps during the same Green Sahara period that scarred the body of the Sphinx. Alternative researchers have taken this as evidence that the Osirian is much older than Seti's temple, possibly thousands of years older. In this interpretation, Seti did not build the Osirian at all. He found it. He incorporated it into his own sacred complex, adding inscriptions where necessary, aligning his temple to its pre-existing axis, and claiming it as part of his legacy. In this sense, Seti was not a builder, but a curator, reusing and repurposing an already ancient monument. This theory gains credibility when compared to other sites. In many parts of the world, younger civilizations have reused the ruins of older ones. The Inca built their temples upon megalithic foundations they did not create. Medieval cathedrals in Europe sometimes incorporated stones from Roman structures. Why should Egypt be different? If the Osirian already existed, Seti's decision to adopt it would fit a familiar human pattern, claiming the grandeur of predecessors to enhance one's own prestige. The Osirian's stylistic isolation also invites comparison to global megalithic traditions. The immense blocks echo Baalbek in Lebanon, where trilithons weighing hundreds of tons were somehow transported and placed. They resemble the fitted stonework of Puma Punku in Bolivia, where precision-cut blocks interlock without mortar. The use of size, weight, and geometry, rather than decoration, suggest a shared architectural philosophy, that permanence comes not from images but from mass. Could these be parallel survivals of a once global tradition? Fragments of a building style belonging to an earlier civilization? Standing inside the Osirian, the impression is profound. The granite pillars rise like trees in a petrified forest, their tops cut flat, their sides polished by age. Water often pools around the base, reflecting the stones in shimmering ripples, as though the monument were meant to exist in dialogue with both earth and water, permanence and impermanence. Visitors report a sense of awe, as if entering a cathedral of stone stripped of ornament, where silence itself becomes the ritual. If the Osirian predates Seti, it may have been part of an older sacred landscape, one remembered dimly by later Egyptians as the mythic domain of Osiris. Perhaps this is why Seti chose Abydos for his temple in the first place, to tie himself to the memory of gods who ruled in the first time, Zep Tepi. If so, then the Osirian is not just a curiosity, but a surviving fragment of that earlier age, a stone witness to a civilization erased by time. The mainstream explanation remains. Seti built it, in archaic style, for symbolic reasons. But the water damage, the megalithic scale, and the silence of its blocks leave open another possibility, that Egypt, like many places on Earth, inherited monuments far older than its recorded history. And if the Osirian was adopted, not created, then Seti's temple above becomes less an original masterpiece and more a palimpsest, a layer of history written upon older stone. Egypt's story would not begin with the pharaohs, but with builders whose names we no longer know, whose culture vanished, leaving only stone too massive to erase. The Osirian waits in shadow behind the bright halls of Seti's temple. Tourists often miss it, unaware of the mystery lying just beyond. Yet to those who descend into its sunken chamber, it offers a riddle in granite. Is this the work of a new kingdom pharaoh, or the echo of a civilization lost to flood and desert? Its pillars rise in silence, its water laps softly at ancient blocks, and its stones seem to whisper, "Not everything in Egypt belongs to Egypt alone." At the base of the Great Sphinx, where pores larger than houses press into the bedrock, the desert holds its breath. For thousands of years, stories have circulated that beneath this silent guardian lies a chamber unlike any other, a library of stone, a vault of wisdom preserved from a time before memory. This is the Hall of Records, a legend whispered in tombs, retold in temples, and kept alive by mystics long after Egypt's dynasties fell. Ancient Egyptian texts hinted at secret repositories of knowledge. Priests spoke of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing, who was said to have inscribed the laws of the cosmos in sacred books and hidden them for future ages. Greek visitors to Egypt repeated tales of subterranean vaults where wisdom from the dawn of time had been locked away. Roman writers described hidden libraries beneath temples, guarded by priests sworn to silence. Across centuries, the story never faded, that beneath the Sphinx and the plateau, something monumental waited. The legend found new life in the 20th century through the visions of Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet. Between 1923 and 1944, Cayce gave a series of trance readings in which he described a chamber beneath the Sphinx's right paw. In his visions, this was the Hall of Records, containing scrolls and tablets that chronicled the rise and fall of Atlantis, a civilization destroyed by cataclysm, yet determined to preserve its knowledge. Casey even predicted that the hall would be discovered by the end of the 20th century and would herald a new era of enlightenment for humanity. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed these prophecies as fantasy. To them, Casey's visions were shaped by the Egyptomania of his era, no more credible than dime store novels about mummies' curses. But the strange twist is this. Beginning in the late 20th century, technology began to reveal anomalies in precisely the place Casey described. In the 1980s, a Japanese research team used ground-penetrating radar around the Sphinx. Their equipment detected rectangular voids beneath its pores and along its enclosure, spaces that looked like chambers. In the 1990s, further surveys by Egyptian and American teams confirmed unusual cavities, though officials quickly downplayed the results. More recently, the Scan Pyramids project of 2015, famous for finding a massive void inside the Great Pyramid, also detected irregularities beneath and around the Sphinx. These anomalies were geometric, with straight edges and sharp angles inconsistent with natural fissures. To believers, this was confirmation. For decades, folklore had insisted on hidden chambers. Now science seemed to agree. Yet every time such discoveries reached the headlines, permission to excavate was denied. Officials cited preservation concerns, arguing that digging beneath the Sphinx risked destabilizing the monument. And so, the voids remain unexplored, sealed by both sand and bureaucracy. This tension between legend and science fuels the enigma. Are the anomalies nothing more than geological quirks, misread by over-eager researchers? Or are they the very chambers described for centuries, waiting silently beneath the pores of stone? The persistence of the story across cultures is difficult to ignore. The Inventory Stela, a controversial artifact dating to the Sayet period, claims that Khufu did not build the Sphinx but restored it, and that hidden chambers already existed beneath. Greek sources speak of Egyptian temples concealing wisdom in underground vaults. Arab chronicles from the medieval period describe sealed rooms beneath Giza, containing treasures and forbidden knowledge. Each tradition points in the same direction, downward. Imagine standing before the Sphinx as the sun sets, its shadow stretching long across the sand. You know from the data that there are voids below. You know from myth that they may hold the memory of a forgotten age, and yet you are not allowed to descend, not even to place a camera into the earth. The silence is deliberate, as though the desert and its guardians prefer the mystery preserved. If the Hall of Records exists, what might it contain? Some imagine shelves of papyrus scrolls, ink still faintly legible, holding lost histories of pre-dynastic kings. Others dream of stone tablets etched with advanced mathematics or star charts mapping the heavens long before known astronomy. The boldest imagine crystalline devices, technologies unknown, remnants of a civilization erased. Or perhaps it is simply an empty chamber, symbolic, a ritual space meant not to preserve objects, but memory itself. The question is not only what lies beneath, but why access is so consistently denied. Is Egypt truly protecting fragile heritage, or is something deeper at stake? Discoveries that align with established chronology are celebrated and broadcast worldwide. Discoveries that suggest deeper, older origins are quietly shelved. The Hall of Records, whether real or not, embodies that conflict, a symbol of what official history allows us to know and what it forbids us to ask. The Sphinx continues to crouch in silence, guarding secrets with stone lips that do not move. The radar whispers of hidden spaces. Legends insist on preserved wisdom, yet the entrance remains sealed, the chamber unseen. It may be sand, it may be myth, or it may be the last library of a world before ours. Standing there, as night gathers over Giza, you cannot help but feel that the Sphinx knows more than it reveals. And perhaps one day, when the desert chooses, the Hall of Records will open, and with it, the past we have long forgotten. Egypt presents itself as a land of openness, a place where the past is constantly unearthed before the eyes of the world. Visitors are told that no country has invested more in sharing its history, and in many ways, this is true. The towering halls of the Grand Egyptian Museum, finally opened after years of anticipation, gleam with polished marble and glass. Inside, thousands of artifacts lie under careful lights: Tutankhamun's golden mask, sarcophagi of painted wood, papyrus fragments preserved behind glass. Documentaries film excavation sites in the Valley of the Kings and Saqqara, following archaeologists brushing sand away from long-forgotten tombs. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities regularly announces new finds: mummies discovered in sealed coffins, statues unearthed from ancient workshops, even the remains of everyday tools left behind by workers. Everything about this presentation radiates transparency, a nation proud of its heritage, determined to display it to the world. Yet beneath this shining surface, another reality emerges. When discoveries threaten to alter the official narrative, access seems to tighten. Excavation permits vanish into administrative limbo. Promising anomalies detected by radar remain uninvestigated for years. Scholars who suggest interpretations beyond the accepted dynastic timeline are branded fringe theorists, their requests for fieldwork quietly denied. To casual observers, Egypt's history looks like an open book. To those who try to turn its hidden pages, the book abruptly snaps shut. The 2025 radar anomalies beneath Khafre's pyramid provide a clear example. When Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi announced the discovery of spiral staircases and deep shafts, the news ricocheted across global headlines. For weeks, newspapers speculated about hidden cities beneath Giza. Television programs replayed the glowing radar images, and public imagination ran wild. Then, just as suddenly, silence fell. Requests for excavation permits were deferred indefinitely. Authorities stated that while the anomalies were interesting, excavation could endanger the structural integrity of the monuments. There would be further study, they promised. No timeline was given. This was not the first time. In the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese radar teams also detected unusual cavities beneath the Sphinx. For a moment, it seemed the mystery of the Hall of Records might be tested at last. But those results, too, were quietly buried beneath official caution. The official reason? Digging near the Sphinx could destabilize it. Decades later, the anomalies remain unexamined. The refrain is familiar: further investigation pending approval. To some, this caution is reasonable. Egypt's monuments are priceless, fragile, and irreplaceable. A reckless excavation could cause damage that no discovery would justify. But to others, the pattern is suspicious. Research that confirms the accepted story: pyramids built as royal tombs, dynastic Egypt as the cradle of civilization, is celebrated, funded, and televised. Research that suggests older origins or anomalous features faces endless delay. It is as though the past itself is curated, with some truths encouraged and others quietly withheld. Consider the role of Zahi Hawass, perhaps the most famous Egyptologist of our time. Charismatic, outspoken, and fiercely protective of Egypt's heritage, Hawass has been at the center of many discoveries and controversies. When radar teams announced their anomalies, Hawass dismissed them as fake news, insisting no permits had been granted. His words carried weight, not only as a scholar, but as a political figure whose career was bound to Egypt's national identity. For him and others, to suggest the pyramids were older than Khufu or built by an unknown civilization is not merely an academic question. It strikes at the foundation of Egypt's story of itself. And here lies the deeper truth. History is not just about the past, it is about the present. For modern Egypt, the pyramids are more than stone monuments. They are national symbols, emblems of cultural pride, economic lifeblood for tourism, and proof of Egypt's place as the cradle of civilization. To suggest that the pyramids were inherited rather than built by the Egyptians risks unraveling that pride, redirecting the glory elsewhere, perhaps to a vanished people with no name. In that sense, the guardians of Egypt's history are not merely protecting monuments from harm, they are protecting identity itself. There is also the question of control. If chambers beneath Giza were opened and they contained texts or artifacts that rewrote history, Who would decide what the world sees? Would the discoveries be displayed in museums or locked away in archives? Archaeology is never free of politics. In a country where tourism provides billions in revenue and where cultural heritage underpins national unity, the stakes are immense. The pyramids are not just stone, they are sovereignty. Independent researchers often tell stories of obstruction. Proposals for excavations that might probe anomalies are delayed for years or denied without explanation. Access to sensitive areas is tightly controlled. Foreign scholars sometimes find their permits revoked if they suggest interpretations outside orthodoxy. Even respected geologists who argue for water erosion on the Sphinx face professional backlash. It is easier to praise the achievements of the pharaohs than to question whether someone else came before them. The image persists, a nation that projects openness while guarding its deepest mysteries. Excavations of predictable tombs are celebrated with press conferences. Digs that confirm established chronology are televised. But chambers that might contain unsettling truths remain sealed, both by stone and by policy. It is tempting to see conspiracy where perhaps there is only caution. Yet the effect is the same. The most intriguing discoveries are those we cannot explore. The voids beneath Khafre's pyramid, the cavities beneath the Sphinx, the L-shaped structure in the Western Cemetery. Each waits in silence, anomalies suspended between myth and reality, never allowed to tip fully into either. The gatekeepers of the past are not villains. They are men and women tasked with balancing science, preservation, politics, and identity. But their caution creates an atmosphere of secrecy, and secrecy breeds speculation. The desert whispers of staircases descending into darkness, but the officials reply only, "Not yet, perhaps never." Meanwhile, the pyramids continue to draw millions. Tourists gaze in wonder, unaware that just meters below their feet, radar has traced shapes that no one is permitted to touch. Scholars argue in journals, but the anomalies remain anomalies. The desert guards its secrets, aided by those whose duty it is to protect or to conceal. Beneath the desert sun, the monuments stand as both revelation and refusal. The stones declare their presence, but the chambers below remain closed. The past is curated, portioned, rationed to us through careful channels. Egypt invites the world to marvel, but only at the story it wishes to tell. Yet still the question lingers. Are these guardians protecting the monuments from us, or protecting us from the monuments? In the sacred city of Heliopolis, where the rising sun first touched the stones of Egypt each morning, priests preserved one of the most enigmatic traditions in all of human history. They called it Zep Tepi, the first time. To modern readers, the phrase sounds like myth, a poetic flourish to explain the origin of the world. Yet to the Egyptians themselves, Zep Tepi was not merely metaphor. It was memory, a record of an age when divine rulers walked the earth, when creation was fresh, and when the foundations of civilization were first laid. The texts are unambiguous. The pyramid texts, carved into Old Kingdom tombs, describe how the god Atum rose from the primordial waters of Nun and brought forth Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture. From them came Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Their union gave birth to Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys, the divine family who, according to sacred tradition, governed Egypt not as distant gods but as living monarchs. These were not abstract cosmic forces, but rulers with names, thrones, and dynasties. The priests of Heliopolis preserved genealogies of their reigns, sometimes listing lifespans of thousands of years. Mainstream Egyptology interprets this as theology. The gods, they argue, were symbolic expressions of natural forces, their reigns a ritual framework legitimizing pharaonic rule. By tracing their authority back to Zep Tepi, later kings linked themselves to divine origins. But the precision of the texts complicates this view. Egyptian scribes were not content with vague allegories. They recorded detailed successions, lengths of reign, and even specific deeds, as though chronicling a history rather than inventing a parable. Consider the Turin king list, a papyrus now fragmented but still legible in parts. It catalogues not only human pharaohs, but gods and spirits of the dead who ruled Egypt for thousands of years before the dynastic period. Likewise, the Palermo stone, an inscribed basalt slab, records reigns stretching back into mythical antiquity. Such documents blur the line between myth and chronicle, presenting Zep Tepi not as a symbolic preface, but as an actual era. Could these texts encode memories of real figures? Some researchers suggest that the gods of Zep Tepi were leaders of a forgotten civilization, their advanced skills remembered as divine powers by later generations. The god Thoth, credited with inventing writing and mathematics, might represent an ancient scholar whose knowledge seemed miraculous to those who inherited fragments of it. Osiris, bringer of agriculture and law, could be the echo of a culture bearer who introduced social order after catastrophe. In this reading, myth is not invention but recollection, history preserved in sacred disguise. The geography strengthens this possibility. Heliopolis, the city of the sun where the priests guarded the Zep Tepi tradition, lies only a few miles from the Giza plateau. Imagine the priests gazing across the Nile toward the pyramids, their own texts speaking of a time before dynasties, before kings, when gods ruled directly. Perhaps those colossal monuments, already ancient in their eyes, were physical reminders of the first time, structures they did not build, but which they inherited and sought to explain through myth. The parallels with other cultures are striking. The Sumerians spoke of antediluvian kings who ruled for thousands of years before a great flood swept them away. The Aztecs described 5 suns, each an age of the world destroyed by cataclysm. The Hindus preserved memories of vast yugas, cosmic cycles of creation and destruction. Again and again, traditions across the globe recall earlier ages when beings greater than ordinary humans walked the earth, only to vanish in floods, fire, or cosmic upheaval. Zep Tepi belongs to this wider pattern, suggesting it may not be a solitary myth, but part of humanity's collective memory of cycles erased by catastrophe. To stand at Heliopolis today is to confront absence. The great temple complex has long since crumbled, its stones carried off for later building projects. Only a single obelisk remains, a solitary granite finger pointing skyward, survivor of a vanished world of priests and rituals. Yet beneath that obelisk, the ground once rang with hymns to the first time, with recitations of creation and divine reigns. The priests spoke their lines as though maintaining a fragile chain across millennia, ensuring that memory of Zep Tepi would not die. Why would they preserve such detail if it was mere fiction? Why list reigns, genealogies, and places if the intent was symbolic? The Egyptians could have spoken in parables, as many cultures do. Instead, they recorded specifics, as if passing on information they themselves did not fully understand, but dared not forget. Perhaps Zep Tepi was their way of explaining the inexplicable. Monuments already ancient in their time, knowledge already inherited, origins already lost. If Zep Tepi was real history recast as myth, then the implications are profound. It suggests that the pyramids, the Sphinx, and even the Osirian are not monuments of Egypt's rise, but relics of its inheritance. The first time would then be the age of the true builders, a civilization erased by flood or desert, remembered only as gods because no other category sufficed. In that sense, the priests of Heliopolis were not theologians inventing stories, but archivists of memory. They encoded what they could not fully explain into mythic form, preserving a thread that reached back to builders long vanished. And in their words we hear the faintest echo of a truth, that our history did not begin neatly with the pharaohs, but extends into shadows where the line between God and man dissolves. To read the pyramid texts is to feel that echo. Atum created himself in the first time, they proclaim. He rose from the waters, he gave birth to Shu and Tefnut. Behind the poetry may lie geology, the memory of floods and the emergence of land. Behind the names may lie rulers, their deeds refracted through centuries. Behind the myth may lie history, erased but not forgotten. Zep Tepi stands as both myth and memory, a threshold into an age that official history cannot reach. The obelisk of Heliopolis still points toward the sky, a silent witness. Perhaps it points also toward the truth of the first time, a truth waiting to be uncovered beneath the sand. Across cultures, across centuries, across oceans, humanity tells the same haunting story. The world was once destroyed by water. Entire civilizations washed away, landscapes swallowed, the earth itself remade by a flood so immense that only fragments of memory survived. These accounts echo through sacred texts, oral traditions, and myths carved into stone. Echoes that may not be invention, but remembrance of a catastrophe real and global. In Mesopotamia, the oldest written story in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, recounts how Utnapishtim was warned of a deluge by the gods. He built a great boat, preserved animals and family, and endured the rising waters that swept humanity into oblivion. The similarity to the biblical story of Noah is undeniable. Both tales describe divine warning, construction of an ark, survival of a chosen few, and the renewal of life after destruction. Scholars have long debated whether one tradition borrowed from the other, yet what if both drew on something older still, a shared memory of an actual event? Far away in India, the Shatapatha Brahmana describes Manu, the primordial man, saved by a fish who guides him to build a vessel before a flood covers the earth. In Greece, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha tells of a flood sent by Zeus to wipe out a corrupt humanity. In the Andes, the god Viracocha sends floodwaters to erase earlier races of giants before fashioning a new humanity. Among the Hopi of North America, oral tradition speaks of previous worlds destroyed by floods and fire, with only a few escaping through hidden passageways. Polynesian chants from Hawaii to New Zealand recall rising seas that consumed ancestral islands. The details vary, but the essence remains constant: a great flood, near total destruction, survival of a remnant. For centuries, scholars treated these myths as metaphors for seasonal rains or moral tales about renewal. But in the 20th century, geology began uncovering evidence that these stories might reflect real events. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age waned, Earth entered a climatic whiplash known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere plummeted by more than 15 degrees Fahrenheit within decades. Vast ice sheets that had been melting suddenly stabilized, then melted again with catastrophic speed. The results were enormous floods, not slow sea level rise, but torrents that reshaped continents. In North America, the collapse of glacial Lake Missoula unleashed a wall of water hundreds of feet high, carving the scablands of Washington state. In Europe, the bursting of glacial dams released torrents into valleys, leaving behind layers of silt and erratic boulders far from their source. Across Asia, rivers swelled beyond measure, and ancient lakebeds filled and emptied in geologic moments. Marine fossils have been found atop mountains, carried there by temporary surges of seawater. Even more striking, evidence of sudden sea level rise is preserved worldwide. During the end of the Ice Age, melting ice sheets raised oceans by more than 400 feet. Coastlines where early humans lived and thrived vanished beneath the waves. Archaeologists have identified submerged settlements off India's Gulf of Khambat, where stone structures and tools lie hundreds of feet underwater. Off Yonaguni, Japan, terraces and platforms shaped like steps descend into the sea, as though an ancient city had been drowned. In the Mediterranean, the submerged city of Pavlopetri in Greece reveals streets and courtyards preserved beneath shallow waters. All of this mirrors the myths: cities lost to the sea, lands swallowed, peoples forced to flee inland or perish. For those who survived, the memory would be seared into collective consciousness, told and retold as warning, as prophecy, as sacred truth. What does this mean for Egypt? If the Younger Dryas floods were truly global, then the Nile Valley was not immune. The pyramids themselves, perched on high ground, may have been spared, but evidence of flooding clings to the plateau. The deep weathering of the Sphinx enclosure, often dismissed as rain erosion, could also be explained by torrents of water rushing across the plateau during these ancient upheavals. The Sahara, now the world's largest desert, was once green and wet, crisscrossed by rivers and lakes. A sudden shift back to aridity could have buried entire cultures beneath dunes, their memory preserved only in myth. Archaeological evidence supports the idea that humanity was far more advanced at the cusp of this catastrophe than we once believed. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey dates to around 9600 BCE, precisely the time the Younger Dryas ended. Its massive carved pillars and astronomical alignments prove that complex organized societies existed at the very moment flood myths suggest the world was remade. If such a site survived in Anatolia, how many others were drowned, washed away, or buried beyond reach? Even genetics whispers of disaster. Studies show bottlenecks in ancient populations, sudden reductions in diversity, as though large portions of humanity were wiped out. Survivors interbred, carrying fragments of lost peoples in their DNA. The flood myths may therefore encode not just symbolic lessons, but lived trauma, remembered across bloodlines and continents. Standing today on the Giza plateau, under a sky that has seen countless ages pass, the stones seem eternal. Yet beneath our feet lies evidence of rivers that once flowed, of climates that shifted violently, of waters that erased worlds. The pyramids and the Sphinx endure, not because they were beginnings, but because they were survivors. Monuments massive enough, high enough, to withstand floods that ended everything else. If this is true, then the flood stories are not coincidences. They are humanity's most ancient testimony, carried forward in different tongues, across oceans, across millennia. They tell us that civilization may not rise in a straight line, but in cycles, built, erased, and built again. The Younger Dryas floods ended one world. The monuments of Egypt may stand as the echoes of what came before, fragments left above water when so much else was drowned. And if the sands of Giza guard survivors of that catastrophe, then perhaps what we call the beginning of history is only the beginning of the recovery. High on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, overlooking the plains of the Harran and the distant mountains of Anatolia, there lies a site so improbable that it rewrote the story of human civilization the moment it was uncovered. This is Göbekli Tepe, a place that should not exist and yet does, standing silent as proof that our timeline of history is far from complete. Discovered in the mid-1990s by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, Göbekli Tepe stunned the world. What appeared at first to be an ordinary mound turned out to conceal the earliest known monumental architecture ever built by human hands. Beneath layers of soil were immense T-shaped pillars, carved from local limestone, some towering over 18 feet high and weighing up to 15 tons. Arranged in concentric circles, these pillars were decorated with carvings of animals, foxes, vultures, snakes, wild boar, etched with astonishing artistry. The oldest layers date back to around 9600 BCE, 7,000 years before Stonehenge, long before the rise of Egypt or Sumer. The implications cannot be overstated. According to the old model of history, humans at this time were still hunter-gatherers, moving in small bands, subsisting on wild grains and game. Architecture of such scale required organization, surplus, and planning, all qualities supposedly absent before the advent of agriculture. Yet here were stone enclosures more sophisticated than anything that would be built for millennia afterward. Civilization, it seemed, had appeared suddenly, without precedent. Walking among the ruins today, one can feel the weight of paradox. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe are massive, yet they were set into sockets in the bedrock with remarkable precision. Many display intricate reliefs. A vulture carrying a headless human, a snarling predator crouched in profile, abstract symbols that resist interpretation. Some appear to form narratives, others astronomical alignments. The artistry speaks of minds already steeped in symbolic thought, capable of transforming stone into myth. Yet there are no signs of villages nearby, no evidence of permanent houses. It is as if people gathered here from afar, built temples of unimaginable labour, and then vanished into obscurity. And then there is the greatest mystery of all. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Around 8000 BCE, after centuries of use, its builders filled in the enclosures with tons of rubble and sand, entombing their own creation. This act of intentional concealment preserved the carvings in pristine condition, as though the builders wanted to hide the site from the future or protect it until a distant age. Why would they bury the most extraordinary achievement of their culture? Was it ritual closure, an act of reverence, or a desperate attempt to save something from oncoming catastrophe? For Schmidt, Göbekli Tepe suggested the inversion of everything we thought we knew. Civilization did not begin with farming, leading to surplus and then to temples. Instead, the desire for ritual and gathering may have driven people to organize on a massive scale, and agriculture followed to support the gatherings. In this view, religion, or memory of something sacred, sparked civilization itself. Others take an even bolder view. The sudden appearance of such advanced architecture with no clear precursors suggests inheritance. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning, but the survival of something older, a remnant of knowledge carried by people who endured the Younger Dryas catastrophe. If floods and climate shifts erased coastal civilizations, the survivors might have carried fragments of their culture inland, encoding their memory in circles of stone. The carvings themselves hint at cosmic awareness. A famous pillar known as the vulture stone depicts animals and abstract symbols arranged in patterns some researchers interpret as constellations. Perhaps a record of the night sky around 10,000 BCE, perhaps even a memory of cometary impacts tied to the Younger Dryas. Though controversial, these interpretations suggest that Göbekli Tepe was more than ritual space. It may have been an observatory, a calendar, a library of stone recording the heavens at the dawn of a new age. Compare this to the enigmas of Egypt, and the resonance grows stronger. The pyramids, arriving suddenly in the Old Kingdom, appear fully formed, as though they were not experiments but culminations. The Sphinx bears erosion from rains that fell thousands of years before dynastic times. The Osirian lies in Abydos, like a fossil of megalithic construction. Göbekli Tepe joins this chorus, another monument that seems too advanced, too early, too complete. Standing amid the broken circles today, wind sweeping across the Anatolian plateau, it is hard not to feel time folding. Here are stones set upright more than 11,000 years ago, older than any writing, older than any known city, older even than domesticated grain. Their builders are gone, their villages unknown, their names forgotten. Yet the stones endure, whispering of a people who refused to vanish entirely. They buried their memory, and in doing so, preserved it. Göbekli Tepe is often called humanity's first temple, but perhaps it is better understood as a threshold, a bridge between a lost world and the one that followed. It speaks not of the birth of civilization, but of survival, continuity, and memory. Its very existence forces us to ask whether what we call the first civilizations, Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, were truly first, or merely the latest chapters after a reset. If so, then Göbekli Tepe is not an anomaly. It is evidence of the time before. A reminder that history may not march forward in a straight line, but spiral in cycles of creation, destruction, and renewal. The stones are both beginning and echo, origin and inheritance. And they leave us with a haunting thought. What other monuments, what other memories still lie buried, waiting for us to listen? The sea has always been both cradle and executioner. It nourishes, connects, and provides, yet it also swallows without remorse. Along its shores, the earliest humans found abundance: fish, shellfish, fertile estuaries where rivers met tides. Villages and later cities flourished near the water's edge. But when the ice sheets of the last ice age melted, oceans rose with terrifying speed. In the span of just a few millennia, global sea levels climbed more than 120 meters, high enough to erase entire coastlines. For every village that was buried by sand, countless more may lie drowned, sealed beneath the waves. Archaeologists estimate that during the Ice Age, as much as 10 million square kilometers of habitable land now under the ocean once stretched along the coasts. This means that many of humanity's earliest experiments with farming, trade, and architecture are today inaccessible, lying deep underwater. Every flood myth, every story of cities swallowed by the sea, may echo this great drowning. and in rare cases, fragments of those lost kingdoms resurface. One of the most evocative examples lies off the coast of India, near the modern city of Dwarka. Divers have discovered stone walls, geometric foundations, and paved streets stretching over 5 miles beneath the Arabian Sea. Sonar mapping has revealed symmetrical layouts that resemble harbours and city blocks. Ancient Hindu tradition describes Dwarka as the city of Krishna, a place of splendour said to have been swallowed by the sea after the death of its divine king. For centuries, the story was dismissed as legend. Yet the discovery of submerged structures suggests there may be truth beneath the myth. A civilization literally drowned, remembered in story, when archaeology could no longer reach it. Sail east, and the waters off Yonaguni, Japan conceal another enigma. Here, divers discovered massive terraces and steps cut into the seafloor with angles so sharp they appear artificial. The Yonaguni monument includes flat platforms, stair-like structures, and what some claim is a carved head or animal figure. Debate rages. Are these natural formations shaped by tectonics and erosion, or the remains of an ancient city drowned when sea levels rose? Either way, the impression is uncanny. To swim through Yonaguni's corridors is to feel as though you are moving through the ghost of a forgotten world. Closer to Europe, the submerged city of Pavlopetri off Greece lies only a few meters below the waves. Here, archaeologists have mapped streets, courtyards, and houses dating back more than 5,000 years. Unlike Yonaguni, there is no debate about Pavlopetri's human origin. Its buildings, roads, and pottery confirm that it was once a thriving community, erased by earthquakes and rising seas. Today, it is a perfect snapshot of what happens when coastlines drown. Whole cities vanish, leaving only the faintest whispers in memory and myth. Other submerged sites are scattered across the world. In the Gulf of Kambat in India, sonar images suggest structures far older than Harappan civilization, though sediment and controversy obscure their interpretation. In the Mediterranean, divers have found temple foundations and harbour works now meters beneath the surface. Along Britain's coast, the sunken land of Doggerland, once connecting England to continental Europe, has yielded tools, bones, and traces of villages, all swallowed by the North Sea around 6000 BCE. These discoveries remind us of what has been lost. For every Pavlopetri we can map, there are hundreds of other sites hidden in the dark. 90% of the ocean remains unmapped and unexplored. The seabed preserves secrets untouched for thousands of years. When we return in thought to Egypt, the implications grow sharper. The Giza plateau sits on high limestone ground, safe from the worst of rising seas. Perhaps this is why its monuments endure. If a global flood swept the earth during the Younger Dryas, the pyramids may have survived precisely because of their elevation and immensity. While other cities drowned, these stones remained, survivors of a world erased. And what if the myths of Atlantis, Cantrea Gwaelod in Wales, or Wys in Brittany, are not fables but memories of real submerged lands? Plato's tale of Atlantis, a mighty civilization drowned in a single day and night of floods, may reflect a collective trauma, retold in Greek dress. When people lose their homes to the sea, they do not forget. They pass the story on, transmuting tragedy into legend. Imagine walking along a modern coastline, knowing that just beyond the waves lie the bones of forgotten cities. Imagine divers descending into clear water, their lights catching on a stone wall, a staircase, a column base, pieces of a story written before writing itself. The sea, vast and silent, guards these memories with unyielding patience. The Great Pyramids loom above the desert, but perhaps they are not unique miracles. Perhaps they are simply the lucky survivors, spared by geography, while their kin vanished beneath waves. If so, the monuments of Egypt stand as the last visible companions of a much larger world, a network of civilizations scattered along coasts, erased when the seas rose. The ocean is mystery itself. Its darkness swallows sound and light, its depths remain less explored than the surface of Mars. If we seek the missing chapters of our history, we must look there, where salt and silence preserve what fire and desert erase. The true story of civilization may lie not in deserts or ruins, but beneath the restless waves. Egypt's pyramids may only be the tip of an iceberg of memory, the dry survivors of a flood that ended worlds. History is written in stone, but it is also written in flesh. Beneath our skin, inside every cell, coils of DNA carry memories deeper than any monument. Unlike papyrus, which crumbles, or inscriptions which weather, the code of life endures, copied generation after generation. In recent decades, genetic science has begun to read this ancient script, and what it reveals is no less mysterious than the pyramids themselves. Within our bloodlines lie shadows, fragments of peoples long vanished, civilizations erased, ancestors whose faces we will never see yet, whose legacy still walks among us. The story begins in the Levant, where archaeologists unearthed bones of the Natufians, a culture that thrived around 12,000 years ago, precisely during the turbulent climatic shifts of the Younger Dryas. Their remains, when sequenced, showed something astonishing, a blend of genetic signatures linking them to both sub-Saharan Africa and early Europeans. They were neither wholly local nor wholly foreign, but something in between, a crossroads population, carriers of lineages that defy neat classification. These same Natufians are widely believed to have pioneered the transition to agriculture, inventing settled life at the very dawn of history. Could it be that they inherited knowledge, passed down from survivors of an earlier civilization erased by flood and climate? The mystery deepens with modern Egyptians. Genome studies reveal traces of lineages not accounted for by known history. Ancient DNA extracted from mummies shows affinities not only with Near Eastern populations, but also with groups from the deep Sahara and even Europe. The genetic picture is layered, like sediment in the Nile Valley. Waves of ancestry deposited, erased, overlain, yet never fully gone. Within those layers lurk ghost populations, groups that no longer exist in pure form, yet whose fragments remain in us. Who were these people? Where did they come from? The archaeological record is silent, but the body remembers. This phenomenon is not limited to Egypt. Across Eurasia, geneticists have discovered signals of mysterious ancestors who contributed to the modern gene pool but left no identifiable remains. One famous case is the Denisovans, an archaic human group identified not through skeletons but through DNA fragments extracted from a single finger bone and a tooth in a Siberian cave. Their genes today live on in Tibetans, Melanesians, and indigenous Australians, influencing traits from high-altitude adaptation to immune response. For centuries, we did not know Denisovans existed, yet millions of people still carry their legacy in their blood. If such forgotten lineages existed in the deep past, why not also in the shadowy dawn of civilization? In the Americas, the story takes another twist. Genetic evidence from ancient remains shows links between early Native Americans and populations in Australasia, a connection once thought impossible. How did these lineages meet? Did survivors of floods cross oceans? Did migrations occur from lost coastal lands now drowned beneath the Pacific? The answers remain elusive, but the genetic record insists on a complexity far beyond the simple migration maps in textbooks. All of this suggests that humanity's story is not linear, but braided, like the channels of the Nile. Civilizations rise, fall, and vanish, but their people endure, blending into new groups, leaving only traces in the double helix. The monuments of Egypt may be mute, but our very existence is testimony that others came before us, their legacies flowing invisibly into our veins. Consider this. If a global flood truly destroyed advanced societies at the end of the Ice Age, their survivors might not have preserved their monuments, but they would have preserved their bloodlines. Knowledge can be forgotten, but genes persist. That persistence may explain sudden leaps in culture, why agriculture appeared almost simultaneously in different parts of the world, why megalithic traditions spread across continents, why myths of floods and gods repeat with uncanny similarity. These echoes are not only cultural, but biological, carried inside us. Imagery brings this truth alive. Picture a shepherd in the highlands of Ethiopia, unaware that his DNA contains traces of a ghost population that lived tens of thousands of years ago. Picture a fisherman in the Mediterranean, whose blood still whispers of Natufians who sowed the first seeds after the flood. Picture a child in the Andes, whose ancestry carries fragments of Denisovans, linking him invisibly to a cave in Siberia. Each human body is a library, written in a code we are only just beginning to read. The pyramids themselves could be seen as a metaphor for this. Their surfaces bear little inscription, their interiors remain largely silent, yet their very form encodes mathematical constants, alignments, and cosmic symbolism. In the same way, our bodies seem ordinary, yet hidden within them are alignments of ancestry that connect us to forgotten builders, storytellers, and dreamers. The stone remembers through geometry. The blood remembers through genes. Skeptics argue that reading too much into these ghost lineages risks distorting science with speculation. And they are right to be cautious. DNA can tell us that lineages existed, but not what culture they built, what language they spoke, or what monuments they raised. Yet when placed beside the myths of Zep Tepi, the anomalies of the pyramids, and the scars of floods on the Sphinx, these genetic shadows add another layer of intrigue. It may be that what archaeology cannot show, genetics can hint at. That civilization is older, deeper, and more complex than we have ever imagined. The science of forgotten bloodlines transforms how we think about history. It tells us that no people are ever truly gone. They survive in fragments, in echoes, in tiny sequences of DNA that endure through countless generations. When we look in the mirror, we are not just seeing ourselves. We are seeing the sum of civilizations erased, voices silenced, monuments toppled, worlds drowned, yet all still alive in the silent language of genes. If the pyramids are the enduring stones of lost civilizations, then our bodies are their living legacy. Each heartbeat carries within it the pulse of forgotten peoples. Each breath carries their survival. And in this, the greatest truth emerges. The builders may be gone, but they are not lost. They are us. Civilizations leave behind their tools. Pottery shards, chipped flints, copper chisels, and wooden plows tell the story of how people lived, worked, and built. In archaeology, these objects are anchors, proof that the narrative is correct. Simple tools, simple structures, slow evolution. Yet scattered across the world are objects that refuse to fit neatly into this progression. Artifacts so advanced, so anomalous, that they feel as though they belong to another time entirely. These are the out-of-place artifacts, the tools that whisper of forgotten knowledge. Perhaps the most famous is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. At first it looked like nothing more than a corroded lump of bronze, but X-rays revealed something extraordinary, a set of finely crafted gears, dials, and inscriptions that together formed a device capable of tracking the cycles of the sun, the moon, and even predicting eclipses. Built over 2,000 years ago, it is essentially an analog computer, unmatched until the clockmakers of the Renaissance. Who built it, and how did they acquire such knowledge? Was it an isolated marvel, or the surviving fragment of a broader tradition of lost technology? In Iraq, another enigma emerges, the so-called Baghdad battery. Clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods have been interpreted by some as galvanic cells, primitive batteries capable of producing electricity. Skeptics argue they were merely storage vessels, but experiments show they can indeed generate small currents when filled with acidic liquid. If they were batteries, what were they used for? Electroplating metals? Rituals involving shocks of divine fire? Or something we cannot imagine? Closer to Egypt, the anomalies deepen. Stone blocks in the quarries of Aswan display drill cores with spiral grooves, marks that suggest tools rotating with far more force than simple copper drills could produce. At Giza, fragments of granite appear cut with saws that would have required blades harder than bronze. Egyptologists explain these as the result of persistence, thousands of workers labouring for decades with sand and copper to grind away at stone. But engineers who examine the marks shake their heads. The evidence, they argue, looks more like machine cutting than hand labour. Could it be that Egypt inherited not just monuments, but also techniques from an earlier age? Such anomalies are not confined to Egypt or the Mediterranean. In South Africa, miners have found mysterious metallic spheres embedded in Precambrian rock dated billions of years old. Some spheres display parallel grooves running around their circumference, too precise to dismiss as natural. Mainstream science calls them curiosities of geology. Others see them as fragments of tools from a civilization so ancient it has vanished without trace. Maps, too, become tools out of place. The Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, shows the coastlines of South America with uncanny accuracy, centuries before they were officially mapped. Even more puzzling, parts of the map depict what looks like the ice-free coast of Antarctica, a land supposedly undiscovered until 1820 and locked in ice for thousands of years. How could a 16th century admiral have access to such knowledge unless he drew from sources far older than we admit? Then there are the mechanisms of myth, tales of crystal skulls, fire-forging mirrors, and flying machines in Sanskrit epics like the Vimanas. Most historians dismiss these as legend, but when read beside the physical anomalies, they create a haunting pattern, whispers of technologies misplaced in time. Critics urge caution. Many so-called anomalies are explained as misinterpretations. The Baghdad battery may not be a battery at all. The South African spheres may be natural concretions. The Piri-Reis map may simply combine distorted medieval sources. These explanations are reasonable, yet they rarely account for the uncanny precision, the recurring pattern of sophistication surfacing in unexpected places. Even if half the anomalies are illusions, the other half still demand attention. Imagine an archaeologist 10,000 years from now stumbling upon a smartphone in a collapsed city. Without context, it might look like a strange piece of polished stone. Unless they found more, they might dismiss it as an oddity, an outlier. What if the same has happened to us? What if the Antikythera mechanism, the Baghdad battery, and the anomalous stone cuts are just the surviving scraps of a technology mostly erased, a language of invention whose dictionary has been lost? This perspective reframes the Great Pyramids themselves. Could their silence be deliberate, their blank walls designed to conceal methods and purposes alien to later eyes? If tools of power were scattered across the world, from Greece to Mesopotamia to Egypt, might they all be echoes of a forgotten scientific tradition? A tradition drowned in flood, buried by sand, remembered only in fragments? Picture standing in a museum, staring at the Antikythera mechanism behind glass. Its corroded gears, once gleaming, now frozen in rust, are all that remain of a mind that lived 2 millennia ago. Then imagine a pharaoh's workers pulling granite cores with spiral grooves, or jars in Baghdad producing sparks of electricity in rituals lost to time. These are not isolated curiosities, they are hints. And hints, when gathered, become testimony. Tools out of place remind us that history is not neat. It is jagged, fragmented, and often censored by time itself. The pyramids may seem isolated, but they may belong to the same broken pattern, survivors of a world whose tools we only glimpse in scattered relics. And so, the question lingers: how many more tools are hidden, mislabeled, or ignored? How much of our past remains invisible, lying not in the grand monuments we celebrate, but in the forgotten artifacts we dismiss as errors? The stones of Egypt whisper of lost builders. The tools out of place are their fingerprints, faint, scattered, but undeniable. Across the world, great rings of stone rise from earth and sky, as if echoing a forgotten pattern. From the windswept plains of Salisbury to the high plateaus of Bolivia, megaliths align with the sun, the moon, and the stars. They stand not just as monuments, but as gateways, portals carved into the landscape, linking human life to the cycles of the cosmos. Consider Stonehenge, its trilithons towering in a circle, aligned to the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset. For centuries, people assumed it was an isolated curiosity of prehistoric Britain. Yet similar structures appear in Brittany, Malta, and even North Africa, where the stone circle of Nabta Playa lies buried in the desert sands of southern Egypt. Dating to over 7,000 years ago, Nabta's stones mark solstices and the rising of Sirius, the very star that became sacred in later Egyptian tradition. In South America, at Pumapunku in Bolivia, immense blocks lie scattered like the aftermath of a forgotten cataclysm. Some weigh over 100 tons, cut with such precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate them. Grooves, interlocks, and right angles suggest a technical mastery far beyond the reed and stone tools officially credited to the site's builders. Standing there, amid shattered monoliths, one feels as if time itself has fractured. What ties these sites together is not geography, but intent. Their builders sought permanence, alignment, and connection to forces larger than themselves. They were not simply making shelters or tombs, they were building maps in stone, bridges between the earthly and the cosmic. Each monument was a portal, marking the passage of time, of stars, perhaps even of memory. If such traditions were scattered across continents, is it possible they stem from a common origin? A knowledge system older than any recorded culture, passed on through survivors of catastrophe? The pyramids of Egypt, with their cardinal orientations and stellar alignments, fit seamlessly into this pattern. They are not alone, but part of a vast architecture of memory, a global language written in stone. To walk among these megaliths is to feel folded time. The same stars rising over Britain, Bolivia, and Egypt, all fixed against the same horizon of human wonder. If the Great Pyramids are more than tombs, they may be Egypt's version of this portal tradition, not just graves for kings, but markers of continuity, reminders that knowledge survives disaster by embedding itself in the landscape. Each megalith is both question and answer, both silence and signal. Together, they whisper of a time when humanity built not only for survival, but for eternity, shaping stone into doorways through which memory itself could step. The journey circles back, as it must, to Giza. We began beneath the desert sun of 2025, with radar waves pulsing into the stone. Now, after wandering through myths of floods, buried temples, and global megaliths, we return to the plateau with new eyes. The pyramids no longer stand in isolation. They are joined by echoes from Turkey, India, Japan, Bolivia, fragments of a shattered mosaic of human memory. The anomalies detected by Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi take on new weight in this context. Spiral staircases winding into the earth, shafts plunging deeper than skyscrapers, cubic chambers large as city blocks, hydraulic channels etched with knowledge of water's flow. These are not just curiosities. They mirror the same sophistication glimpsed at Göbekli Tepe, the same cosmic alignments found at Stonehenge and Nabta Playa, the same architectural ambition carved at Pumapunku. If such patterns recur across the world, then Giza may be more than Egypt's triumph. It may be the keystone of a civilization that spanned oceans before the Younger Dryas flood drew the curtain. The desert silence hides not only voids of stone, but voids of history. Perhaps the true pyramid lies not above, but below, a second world of chambers and tunnels, waiting in darkness for rediscovery. Official voices dismiss these interpretations. They remind us that radar can deceive, that anomalies can dissolve into natural fissures. Yet the geometry is stubborn. Nature does not carve spirals that keep their ratios or cubic voids aligned like architecture. Water does not cut channels with mathematical consistency unless guided by design. The possibility remains. Beneath the most studied site on Earth, a city sleeps. If those chambers are real, then what waits inside them? Texts of stone or tools out of place? Knowledge of stars or memories of a flood? Perhaps nothing more than silence. But silence itself can speak volumes. For silence at the heart of the Great Pyramid, silence on the body of the Sphinx, silence in the Osirian, all point to the same absence, a memory erased. Return to the plateau, and the monuments feel different. They are no longer only pharaohs' tombs or dynasties' pride. They are markers in folded time, signposts pointing toward an earlier world. The question is no longer who built them, but what survived. And if the radar whispers true, then 2025 may be remembered not for the discovery itself, but for the beginning of the unsealing, the moment the desert allowed a glimpse of what it has hidden for millennia. Night returns to the plateau and the desert cools. The Great Pyramid rises black against the stars, the Sphinx crouches in silence, and the sands whisper only in the wind. For millennia, these monuments have stood as beginnings, the cradle of civilization, the first pages of history. But if the radar scans of 2025 speak truly, then they are not beginnings at all. They are remnants, fragments of a story older than Egypt, older than memory. Beneath the stone, spirals coil downward into darkness. Chambers vast as cathedrals hold their silence. Hydraulic channels glisten in the radar's electronic vision, suggesting that once water flowed here, feeding a hidden world. All of it waits, sealed away, beyond the reach of tourists' footsteps and scholars' debates. It is as though the desert itself chose to guard the echo of another age. The myths, too, echo. Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked as kings. Flood stories whispered in every language, of worlds destroyed and reborn. Stones carved in Turkey, Bolivia, and Britain, aligned to stars as though remembering the same forgotten sky. Genetics murmuring of ghost populations, bloodlines without names. All these strands converge here, on this plateau of limestone and sand. Perhaps one day, permission will be given. Perhaps the voids beneath the Sphinx will be opened, and the chambers under Khafre's pyramid revealed. Or perhaps the silence will endure, leaving us to wonder forever. Yet even without excavation, the implications remain. If the pyramids are only the surface, then what lies beneath could change everything we believe about who we are. The monuments endure because they are more than stone. They are memory fossilized, portals through which fragments of a forgotten world still reach us. To stand before them is to feel folded time, to sense that history is not a straight line, but a spiral, winding downward into darkness and upward into light. The desert buries, but it also preserves. One day, the sand may give back what it has hidden. Until then, we stand before Giza not as tourists to a cradle, but as witnesses to a grave. And graves are not endings. They are thresholds, places where silence waits to be broken. If you've listened this far, you too are part of this unfolding mystery. Perhaps tonight, as you drift into sleep, ask yourself, what if the Great Pyramids in 2025 truly reveal a lost civilization? Where are you listening from tonight, and at what time?